Welcome, antique and vintage fans. I am glad to have you with us, whether you're a collector, a nostalgia seeker, a reseller, whatever your reason for being here. I am just so excited that we have a nice response to these videos where we spend extra time talking about not just the object and why it's cool, but also the stories behind the object, because it's really exciting to me to see an increasing level of connoisseurship in the online antique and vintage community, and the fact that people are really wanting to know why these things exist rather than just, oh, it's pretty and it's worth X amount of money. Now we're going to talk about the X amount of money part too, because all of the items you see in this video are being listed on eBay. And if you're a level 2 or level 3 member of my channel, you are going to be seeing these early access, so you'll be watching these things as they drop live on eBay. And for the rest of you, we release this video shortly after, so you have a chance as well to check out what's left if it hasn't sold. Everybody gets a chance to follow the market and see how these things do. And we use eBay auctions. Now, a lot of people don't do the auctions on eBay anymore, but the reason I do is because I like to show a snapshot at a particular moment in time of what the market is. And if we do our homework right and understand what we're selling, we generally can get a pretty good price at auction, sometimes a surprising high price. You never know. So that is what we're doing now. I'm going to start with the first of the 20 items that I am listing on eBay. And the first one, I have some really very cute things and some expensive things, relatively expensive for being small, but I don't always just do expensive, because I think there's beauty and fun and whimsy and interest in all sorts of things. And so that's why our first little items here, do not fall off, please. These are called, colloquially anyway, the Humpty Dumpty men salt and pepper shakers. And that is because they have that egg-shaped face, and also because these come out of the stand, which means certainly a bunch of these over their lives took a great fall and are not with us anymore. Here is the Base. The Base has an interesting mark on the bottom. It's a company that we see a lot from later years, but this is very early for them. This, let's get it where you can see it upright. This mark says Ardalt, occupied Japan. Ardalt was probably the first company after World War II with the idea of importing Japanese ceramic items, because people knew that before the war they'd been a big source, and they started in 1945. I mean, the war had just ended, Japan was in ruins, and yet they said, you know, we see the potential, we're going to help rebuild this ceramics market, and we're going to bring these things to the United States. Between 1947 and 1952, anything made in Japan had to be marked occupied Japan. And the reason for that, saying occupied in particular, is that Douglas MacArthur, who was one of the people instrumental behind the rebuilding of Japan, understood that Americans might have hard feelings against the Japanese, and if we said occupied Japan, we were more likely to be willing to buy the products, because that was a reminder that we're in control, it's fine to buy these products. And that turned out to be a really good idea, although truthfully, the Japanese to this day are pretty resentful of it. And there was a time in the 1980s when occupied Japan was a really hot collectible that Japanese buyers would come over, buy pieces, and actually destroy them. So that actually reduced the amount in the marketplace as well. The names of the founders seem to be lost to history at this point. If someone out there knows them, please leave a comment and let us know. But I think these guys are just really cute. And novelty salt and pepper shakers, they've always been good sellers, but they have especially picked up the last few years. And these are really cute because they're all hand painted, as you can see. The condition is great. There's no chips, cracks, or damage. These will likely sell somewhere in the range of about $18 to $20. That seems to be a pretty typical selling price for these. So we're going to put them on eBay now and see how they do. I said in my What Sold video for last month that I kept putting sports items on, even though I know a lot of my audience are women who are not so interested in sports. But there's a few women who are and a few men who are, and I find it interesting. It's certainly a big part of our culture. And this one might be a little bit more interesting to women because this one is a baseball signed by Dolores Lee Drees. She was called Pickles when she played for the Rockford Peaches in 1952, 3, and 4. This is one of the people who was celebrated in A League of Their Own, the movie that had Gina Davis and Madonna, that talked about the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. That's a mouthful. But they played in various mid-sized cities, mostly in the Midwest. In the Second World War, a lot of the men in baseball were drafted and in the military, and so finding baseball games was kind of a tough thing. And so actually some of the Negro League teams and some of the women's teams drew a pretty good following for a period of time there because they were the alternative entertainment. Pickles Drees was a pitcher, and there is a wonderful video that you can look for. I think it's on YouTube, and it shows her with 2 baseballs, and it's a little home movie of her pitching both baseballs simultaneously to 2 catchers, which is a pretty good trick. And this was not a softball lob. This was an overhand pitch. It was very impressive, actually. I have to say, when I saw it, I was pretty knocked out. You might want to look that one up. The ball has some stains that seem to just be probably honestly because of the glue they used, but it is a National League official ball by Rawlings with the cork center, so it's your usual deal. She signed this in 1996. She passed on in 2014, so she's not with us anymore. But she was a good pitcher. She actually had a lifetime ERA in the 2.26 range, which is pretty good. And her signature is not as prolific as some of the other players. I have not seen one of these on eBay for sale in quite a while, so I decided this was the time. I'm starting it at $50. Some of the other players in this league who signed, most of the signatures were done when the movie came out because then there was a lot more interest than there was actually back in their own time. And so other balls signed by other players of that league around the 1990s have sold for as much as $100 to $120. I just think it's great to honor someone who is a woman in sports because so much of the old vintage stuff, it was a man's world and there were not a lot of women. And women were not really encouraged to be athletic until Title IX came about in the early 1970s. And that's why now we have champion women's World Cup soccer teams in the United States and a women's professional basketball league and things like that. So we've come a long way, baby. I have some pieces of jewelry in this sale because we're getting into winter time and people are wearing heavier clothes and dressing up more. There's theater and things that are indoors to do during the cold weather up north. And so I thought I would present this. This is a nice long chain with a Waterford crystal pendant on it. Let me show you a little bit closer up front. And what's nice about it, as you can see with my lighting in the background, there we go, is that it really will catch the other colors around it. So if you're wearing a particular outfit, it's going to reflect and magnify that color. So that makes it a nice sort of accessory that can be used in different ways. Now, some people hang these from their rearview mirrors in the car, and some people hang them in windows to scatter light around a room. So they're not always worn as jewelry, but they were sold that way originally. You can see the Waterford crystal mark on the little bag there that comes with it. And Waterford was a very famous Irish crystal maker. They made all sorts of really beautiful stuff for the home, everything from little pieces of jewelry like this to lamps. The jewelry was a concept that really came about in the 1970s. Wedgwood Porcelain started making jewelry that was in the Jasperware style. A lot of the English porcelain companies that made applied flowers did little pins of applied flowers. And so Waterford said, hey, you know what? We could make crystal jewelry. So they did a short line. It wasn't out for a very long time. And this should sell for somewhere in the $25 to $30 range typically. So we'll put it out there at $9.99. I'm going to try to start a lot of listings at a low price if I can. Some things I have to get a certain amount for, but to be honest, I have a friend who does very well by listing everything at $9.99, no reserve, and just having the confidence that if it's a good piece, it will find its level in the marketplace. If you notice on Crazy Lamp Lady, Jocelyn starts everything at $4. You know, she sells lots of stuff that's worth hundreds of dollars, and she starts it at $4 because she's confident in what she's buying. And I feel like we've got some pretty good stuff here that will sell as well. So when possible, we'll start it low and let the market tell us what the value is. Now, this piece is not one of them because this one has intrinsic value for silver, but it is also a very, very desirable silver pattern. This is called the cactus pattern because of that design right below the bowl. And this is one of the most famous lines by George Jensen. The Danish silver maker came up with this design in 1930, so it is the beginning of the serious Art Deco streamlining period. It definitely is a favorite of mid-century modernists. Cactus is just a great pattern. It has the mark on the back, so you have the little oval cartouche that says George Jensen and then sterling underneath. These pieces are very prized. This is one of the more expensive pieces of sterling flatware that you're going to find in the marketplace now. This is a Demitasse spoon. Replacements Limited doesn't even list this as being available. Silver value on this is probably in the $40 range. Because it's George Jensen, this should easily sell somewhere between $65 and $100, depending on who is out there looking for this piece. People will buy these as individual pieces. I only got the one. I got it for a good price. I actually paid less than the silver value for it. I'm not really sure why they were so generous. I think they just didn't see the mark and didn't know what they had. So I am very happy to have this, and we will send it off to somebody who wants to be born with a silver spoon. This next piece is really interesting because it's something we see a lot and is collectible, and usually we would think, oh, that might be a $20 item. It is this corkscrew from a New York City liquor store. This is pre-Prohibition, meaning before Prohibition was made the law of the land in 1919. Goldberg Wines and Liquors, East Broadway, Houston corner Clinton Street, Fifth Avenue corner 118th Street. So they actually had 3 locations. So Goldberg was doing pretty well. Well, Goldberg, of course, is a Jewish name. And if you look at the back over New York, this is at a time when New York still has a lot of people who speak Yiddish or Hebrew. And so we have the writing in Hebrew as well. And that makes this really unusual. This is not something that I've ever seen before because it's very specific to a community of immigrants at a particular time. New York had a huge wave of immigration between about 1890 and 1910 when this would have been made. And so there would have been a lot of people who really didn't speak English at this point. And so they had to do it in both languages. That's the reason that this is an unusual corkscrew. Now, corkscrews have been collectible for a long time anyway. People who are barware collectors like them. There are people who specialize in pre-Prohibition barware. And since this dates back over 100 years and is a true antique, that would be among them. You would unscrew the cap here. I'm not going to do it, but you would just have it's just a wire corkscrew. You just screw it into the cork and pull it up. Because this is unusual for the Hebrew writing, my guess is that it's going to sell somewhere in the $45 to $50 range, which is more than double what they usually go for. The only ones that sell for more than that are the ones that are advertising particular whiskey companies that people look for and are obscure. But I think that this is going to be similarly obscure, and who knows what this could go for because there's just nothing else like that out there. So I'm excited to put this on and see where it goes. This is another thing. We're going to start it at $9.99 and let the market tell us what the value is at this point in time. So I am definitely curious to see what happens with that. Now we're going to go back and forth across the country with this merchandise and of course around the world. But we are going from New York to California for the next one, because the next one, I'm going to hold it up and you're going to say, oh yeah, that's Sasha Brastoff. You love showing Sasha Brastoff, and gee, you sure do a lot of that. Well, here's the thing. Look at the signature a little more closely, if I can get it to where you can see it. We've got a lot of glare with this lighting. Now you can see a little better. See in the corner, it is actually signed Belair. And it's not spelled like the Belair in California, but it's definitely derived from that, because the fellow who made this, his name was actually Donald Fleischman. But he decided, after working for Sasha Brastoff for a few years as a designer, that he would go off on his own. So in the mid-1950s, he started his own company, and he decided, like a lot of other people who were designers at that time, that he needed a more elegant sounding name. So he created the designer name Mark Belair, and that's what he was known as at that point. And there it is, Mark Belair Limited in California. You do not see these pieces as often as you see Sasha Brastoff pieces. Sasha Brastoff had a few employees who went off to do their own thing. Matthew Adams, who designed his Alaskan line, then broke off on his own and continued to do similar looking Alaska line pieces for several years. Mark Belair obviously got the idea of motion and this verve, this just wildness in the design. This is his Jamaican line. You see the netminder here, wading in the surf. It's very exaggerated in the proportions. The physicality is very interesting, and people really like this stuff. It's very popular when you can find it. This is a nice 10.5-inch size, so it's got a decent size and would be useful for various things. I'm going to start this at $49. I believe the value could be as high as $65, maybe more. Candlestick in this same line recently sold for $80. So I know there's collectors out there, and we will see which one of them finds this and picks it up. It's almost a sure sell. Mark Belair is scarce enough that every time I've had a piece, it's gone immediately. Now we're going back to New York. I told you we were going to fly around the country. And this one I'm going to have to show you on my finger. New York City, the city of New York, 1898 to 1948 Golden Anniversary. This is for the Golden Jubilee of the consolidation of the boroughs into New York City in 1898. It took a long time for them to decide that each of those different sections of town was one city, because it was so big and it had a lot of little centers. It wasn't just Manhattan. But at some point, they realized it just made sense to run it as one city, and that would be how they would solve some of the problems that had happened, because New York grew so fast in the Victorian era with the tenements and all, and they needed to consolidate to be able to provide adequate services like sewage and garbage and make sure it was uniform across all the boroughs. So they celebrated the Golden Jubilee in 1948, and this golden ring was the result. It has an inscription to somebody inside of it that I can't really read, and it is marked 14 karat. You can see the nice detail in the enameling here. It's a really fun and interesting piece, and again, this is something I've never seen before. You don't see a whole lot of Golden Jubilee items from New York. When you do, it's usually the books, it's the papers and the ephemera and the publications and things that people just read and then set on a shelf. You don't see a lot of objects. So my guess is that this was probably a pretty limited thing, maybe even issued for city officials or people with some standing in the community. But it's really unusual, and I am going to start this at $150, which is essentially the scrap value of the gold. Now, it's a small ring. It's about a 5.5, so it fits my pinky finger. You know, people were smaller then. But I think the enameling is really interesting. I think the story behind it is interesting, and it's interesting that it's a ring on a ring. I suspect that we'll find a buyer because it is something really unusual. I picked that out of a bag of scrap gold that I was given and said, take this to scrap, take your commission, send me a check. And I said, I'm going to pick through it first. And that was the only interesting thing in the whole thing. So I'm really glad I was able to save it, because otherwise it would have been melted and none of us would ever have seen it. It's one thing I really like about what I do, is when I can actually rescue something from demise and preserve it for future generations. It just makes me very happy. It makes it more than just a job as a reseller. And that's part of why I resell antiques and vintage, and I'm not really so into the new stuff. This is Fenton's Black Carnival Peacock vase. I usually do a lot of glass on this, and today this is the only piece of glass that I'm showing. But it's a great piece of glass. It is the Black Carnival. Fenton and the other companies really didn't use black amethyst glass. First of all, black amethyst wasn't really popular until the late 20s when the Carnival era was really fading. And secondly, black amethyst, I just think no one had really thought of that, because when they started redoing Carnival in the 50s and the 60s, at first they just did the colors that had been popular in the 1900 to 1920 era. So black was a new idea. Fenton started doing Black Carnival with the Old Virginia line in the late 60s. This piece is a 1970s piece. It does have the oval, it's called Peacock Garden. And it does have the black oval label. You notice there's no number. That means 1960s and 70s, because Fenton started putting a number under, an 8 for 80s, a 9 for 90s, and a 0 for the first decade of the new century. You see a big line across the bottom. That is not a crack. It is a straw mark. It's a firing flaw. It does not go through the glass, but it is visible there, and I like to point that out because flaws like that sometimes scare people off from buying things. And if you're a reseller, especially when it's on the bottom where it doesn't impede the design, sometimes people will price it as is when it isn't. So it is definitely good to know the difference between a factory flaw and actual damage. Now, if that straw mark was across the face of the peacock, well, then this piece would be hard to sell, and it wouldn't matter that it wasn't damaged. So you do want to take into consideration where it is. It's a molded piece. You can see the mold seams here. I just think that the treatment on this dark glass is really, really pretty, and a lot of people really like these. We're going to start this one at $59. I've seen them in the $100 to $120 range as completed sales. It even has its original tag. There we go. Original formula Carnival glass, and then it talks about being a continuing celebration in fine glass, meaning that we are doing Carnival for the first time in a long time. In recent years, antique Carnival glass has become extremely valuable as one of the most collectible types of early American glassware, and that was definitely true around 1970 because the original stuff was around 50 years ago. Carnival glass authorities have claimed Fenton's reproduction of this historic treatment. New Carnival is distinguished by the Fenton hallmark. And it talks about how originally from 1907 to 1920 was when they first made Carnival glass. But there's no mistaking this for old because of the mark, because of the shininess of the iridescence, and because of the color of the glass. Now, from a bunch of big high-powered brand name stuff, we go to something much more modest and really cute. And I just think these are fun, and they are practical in a sense. This is just a sweet little juicer, a reamer. It's a small size. You could have done a small orange on it for just a little bit of juice at breakfast, or it could have been put on a table so that you could squeeze a lemon to put into your tea, for example. This is made in Japan in the 1930s, so you have a little bit, it's not exactly lusterware, but it's definitely got the colors that they like to use at that time. The bright orange, the sort of silky green. The flower transfer on it is an interesting thing to me. This would have been made about 1935, and it's the Depression. So we want to make sure that we throw every imaginable sort of decoration on this to hope to catch someone's attention. Well, some people really like floral china, so we'll put flowers on the duck. It seems a little incongruous, but that's part of what makes collecting Japanese whimsy items fun, is that they often have these very strange details that you don't expect. It's got the Made in Japan mark. When you see Made in Japan, that means 1930s. They didn't call it Made in Japan again until the 1980s, and they used a blue oval paper label at that time. So if it says Made in Japan, it's between the Nippon era, which ended in the late 20s, and the Second World War. Then after the war, it's marked occupied Japan, like those Ardalt shakers we saw, or it's marked just Japan, starting in the mid-50s. So that gives you an idea for age. It's a really cute piece. It's in perfect shape. These are not expensive to collect. They used to go for more, and it's interesting because there's so much interest now in the market for whimsical kitchen items, but I think people have overlooked these because they figure, oh, who hand juices anymore? Well, the truth is, if I'm serving a lemon with fish or something at the table, I would prefer to use a juicer like this because I don't want lemon seeds in my food, and I don't like the idea of squirting a piece of lemon and having it possibly shoot into my eye, which I've had happen before. So I like having one of these at the table if I'm serving that kind of thing. And I think right now these are a great deal. This will probably settle for somewhere in the $25 range, maybe $30. We're starting it at $20, and we're going to see how it does. Quack, quack, quack. Okay, well, our next piece is quite lovely. All of them are, because they are the 12 months of Pinup Girls, and this is the 1947 calendar by Vargas for Esquire. He came to New York sometime, I think, in the late 1930s and had talent as an illustrator. And when he got there and saw all sorts of lovely women dressed, and New York was the center of high fashion, he was so knocked out that he decided that, yes, I want to illustrate pinup art. And he was very, very good at it. Other people did this work too, Petty, Elvgren, but Vargas is probably the most collectible of all of them because he had a way of making them very sexy and cute and a little risque without crossing a line. Now, if you look at his published art in compendiums, he actually did a lot of nudes and that sort of thing as well. But Esquire, even though it was a men's magazine, quote unquote, this is before Playboy. You didn't do nudity because you could be arrested. Hugh Hefner, when he did the first Playboy in 1953, contacted lawyers first and was so concerned about it that I believe they didn't put an issue number on it because he was afraid that they might all be raided and destroyed, and he wasn't sure there'd be a second issue. So this was about as close to that as they got in the 40s. Here we've got this very lovely woman smoking a cigarette in a very gauzy outfit. These are very cute. A lot of people took these apart in the 1980s and 90s and framed them when they were less expensive, because there were a lot of these around. They were popular as gifts. Esquire was really big on putting a Christmas issue out every year, and so they sold a lot of these. So many have been taken apart that now it's more desirable to find them intact, and I've just never been able to bring myself to take one apart if it's all the way there. This doesn't have the envelope. It came originally in a mailing envelope. That would make it even better. But because the overall condition is really good, it's not really heavily yellowed, it's not stained, there's no bumps or tears or anything, I pay money for these. So this one we are starting at $59.99. That is the low end of what these sell for. And we'll see if we get a buyer for it. I've seen them recently sell for as high as $75 and $85. I've seen them sell in retail establishments for over $100. So we'll find out what the market is. We're coming into a new year, so somebody might need a calendar. And who cares if the dates are wrong? The funny thing is they're actually reissuing old calendars and figuring out which ones the days of the year correspond to the current year and then putting those out. So who knows, maybe 1947 lines up. Well, we have another piece of jewelry in a blue bag, but this blue bag has a different mark on it because this blue bag is Tiffany & Company, and this is our piece of jewelry. It is this very interesting, sinuous, curved sterling necklace, and it is part of a line that was done around 2005 for Tiffany by Frank Gehry, the architect. It's interesting to me that they actually commissioned an architect to do this, But that's because he was very, very popular in the 90s and early 2000s. He did a lot of famous designs. He did the Experience Music Project building in Seattle that's supposed to look like Jimi Hendrix's melting guitar. He did a big, for the Olympics in Barcelona, he did a giant pavilion that looks like it has a giant fish on top of it. He's known for creating things with very sinuous lines like this piece here. And that's why these were desirable when new, and they're still pretty desirable in the marketplace. Interestingly, a lot of people in architecture, even though he's quite famous and well regarded, a lot of people who are in the building trades do not like his work because he's very good at imagining and drawing out these sinuous curves and these really interesting looking things that then prove to be impossible to build. They had horrible cost overruns at the Experience Music Project. It's a good thing that Paul Allen was behind that with his billions of dollars from Microsoft, because it might not have ever been finished otherwise. And they couldn't do it to Gary's original drawings because it was physically impossible to create the structure the way that he designed it. So Gary is somewhat controversial inside the industry, but outside the industry, he is really, really well regarded. And that's why Tiffany commissioned him to do this line. They also did some of these that look like orchids. They did some that look like fish. He did a whole line for them. These are pretty popular. This one I am starting at $100. That's not going to be a $9.99er because the real selling prices on these seem to be in the $145 to $245 range, depending on the day and who sees it. So we'll see who sees this one. But it certainly is a really interesting piece, and as a piece of jewelry, I think it's really cool. I have to say the little cord they have it on is very small. If it were mine, I would probably put a longer chain on it, but we'll leave that up to the buyer. We have some Italian items this time. I've been showing a lot of little toy vehicles and promotional cars in my last couple of sale videos for eBay because I got a very cool collection. And I saved this one for this time because I thought it'd be fun to have just one more. This one is a company called Paula Toys. Not everyone in America is familiar with this. They're very popular in Europe, but there are American collectors too. I got this one in Seattle. This is the Alfa Romeo Zagato, and it is a 1930s vehicle that was done by Paula Toys in the 1970s. It's in the original box. I'm going to take it out so you can see it better, but the fact that it has the original box in reasonable, not perfect, but reasonable condition with the original little foam wrap there, that actually does help the value. This one is a convertible and it has all the parts. So this is how it's presented. This one is in mint condition. It's not been played with at all. It's lived in that box since it was made 50 years ago. So it's got all its pieces, which is important. And one of those pieces is this little section here for the cabriolet. Well, you take this out carefully. There we go. It's got just a couple of pegs, and then this also has, which is important, the original convertible top as well as the piece that makes it look complete. See where the little pegs go. So if you see one of these and it's got the hole showing and there's no other parts, it's incomplete. It's really important to the collectors of these things. They want it in mint condition if possible. They want all the accessories if possible. So we'll put that back on, and now it has its little tonneau cover. Alfa Romeo made beautiful cars back in the day. In fact, I had a friend who had a 1980s Alfa Romeo. It was a beautiful car too. It was in the garage a whole lot being repaired, but it looked great doing it. So we're going to set this back on and we'll put this back in the box. These sell for surprisingly high amounts. They sell for more than similar pieces by Matchbox from the same era, for example. Again, I'm going to start this one at $9.99, but typical selling prices are usually in the $40 to $60 range for those. Now, a lot of those sales are made in Europe. I'm reluctant to ship because I've had bad experiences. eBay is changing its global shipping right at the beginning of the month, which is when I'm listing this. So that may be an impediment. We'll see what happens. I'm not sure we'll get the prices that they would get in Europe for these, but we may. And we'll see if that global shipping works out. The next piece I have is also Italian, but it is of a very different nature because it looks like a magazine. In fact, if you hold it just so, it looks like you have a rolled up magazine in your hand. And that was very deliberate because this is actually a purse. And this purse is supposed to be the cover of Grazia magazine, but it's got a leather strap on it. And that is because when you pull this open, and this one's in great condition. I mean, the leather is flawless. The tab works perfectly. A lot of these are not in great condition. So the interior is really good. These were done by a company, I think other companies did it too, but Delisle in Italy is the maker name. And look how clean that is. Makes it definitely more valuable. These were made in the early 1970s, and the reason that they became a fashion feature in Milan, in the fashion world there, is because in the early 70s, Italy was having really bad economic problems. They had hyperinflation. The value of their currency plummeted. That's why so many great things ended up being exported to the United States at that time, because Italian goods suddenly were very cheap. In Italy, people were desperate for money, and purse snatching suddenly was a huge problem. Women were having their purses stolen from them all the time. So somebody came up with the idea of a clutch purse that you could roll a magazine around, and someone else said, well, why don't we just make them look like magazines so that when a woman's walking down the street with it under her arm, it just looks like she's got a rolled up magazine and she's just walking down the street with it. And that became this fashion trend, and they're just great. There's a lot of collectors of these, and the prices have continued to go up because as time goes on, you know, they're fairly lightweight. This could start to riffle, this paper in here, it could get stained. It was easy to sort of chip and knock these edges. They're pretty lightweight. And so because of that, finding them in this kind of condition is the trick. And I was really excited to come across one because I haven't had one for a while, and every one I've ever had has sold really quickly. They seem like they're now selling in the $85 range. We're going to start this one at about $45 and just let the market tell us where it is. But this exact one has sold for $85 pretty recently. So I feel that that's going to be a winner. And I just think they're really cool. And while we're on Italian, I've got one more Italian piece. We somehow got all of them in a row. And that is this one. You may have seen me buy this in a junk store in eastern Kentucky during a highway sale. I think she's just lovely. Look at the detail. This is what I look for when I buy a carved shell cameo. First of all, I really prefer the carved shell. The ones made out of the lava are collectible and valuable, but I don't think they have as nice a look. And the ones made of plastic to look like this, well, they just don't look the same. If you could see it from my perspective with this bright studio light coming through it, you would see light glowing through because it is indeed a shell. We can show you in the back there. So it's a natural material. It's a nice filigree. I presume that this is silver. It's not marked. Not all of them are marked that are sterling. I suspect it's sterling or some maybe coin silver, but it is a very nicely done filigree. The filigree is in good condition and not dented. That's very important. This one we assume is from the 1950s because it has the safety catch rather than just a C-clamp. And it's very small and hard to see, but you can see up at the top it has a little ring, and that means it could be put on a chain and worn as a pendant. And usually when they're convertible like that, they're post-war, but I think this is pretty early post-war. I really look at the delicacy in the carving, and I like the fact that she has her hair up. We don't see that as often. Anything that's a little bit different makes a cameo a little bit more valuable than the most common ones we see where the long hair is down and sometimes the carving isn't. I always look at the nose. If the nose seems to be well formed, I figure that the rest of the piece is probably good. A lot of times they have a very chopped angular nose if it was done by a not so skillful carver. So I think this is a very nice piece. It's 1 3/4 inches, so it's a fairly prominent size. It's definitely something if you wore people would notice. And I'm starting this at just $29.99. I would expect that it would sell for somewhere close to double that these days. I have a lot of older dealers who remember when people who were grandmothers in the 1970s and 80s were collecting, and then those people were no longer with us. And dealers who've been around that long, every time I buy cameos or they see me with them, say, "Oh, I can't believe you're buying cameos. I haven't been, oh, cameos went out years ago." Well, they're wrong. Cameos are back. I've got several buyers who are really hot for them, and the prices are at a point where they're low enough that a lot of people can access them now. But there's some really beautiful ones. There's some that are done with gold surrounds or have a diamond in them, like they're wearing a necklace themselves and there's a diamond in the necklace, a real diamond. And those can sell for several $100s. So cameos are definitely something to look for. Well, we're just leaving the holiday season, but Christmas was, well, it was this week. And I hope you all had fun, and I hope you got everything you wanted. But of course, as we collectors know, oftentimes we get to indulge ourselves after Christmas because we take our return money and we take the things we didn't want and we trade them in and we go buy what we really wanted that people were afraid to buy for us because they don't know what we have in our collection. So this is CocaCola Christmas that is not about Santa, and I'm going to leave her in the wrapper, so I'll hold her at a little bit of an angle. She is toasting some gentleman. She's quite young and cute and a little bit freckly. She is very similar and may actually be the same woman who was on their 1950 Coca-Cola tray, which is probably the most widely seen, with the blonde girl in the soda fountain with all the little college pennants and things around her. That is probably the most well-known of the early Coca-Cola trays. It says, "Drink Coca-Cola." That's a 1950s slogan. "Sign of good taste," also 1950s. And you can just tell by the short haircut and the cut and the updo. She's wearing one of those net hats with a little flower in it like a fascinator. She's just darling. It's a nice size. It's not Santa. And, you know, the Santa ones are very collectible for being Santa, but this is something you don't see as often. So I think it's a good one. I have not actually seen this one for sale anywhere, and I haven't run into this one before. It's a pretty good size too. I think it's about 16 by 12. So it will be a nice addition to somebody's Christmas collection or their Coca-Cola collection. Cardboard is something you see in advertising that until recently has not been as valuable with signs because cardboard is more likely to have bumps. It also was more likely to be produced in large numbers, but this one did not appear to be produced in large numbers. It would have been a store placard. A lot of these would have been thrown away after they were done with the season or a couple of seasons, and then styles changed and we toss that and we go to the next one. So finding these in good condition like this is not easy to do. And so I'm starting this one at only $29, but I really think she's worth about double that. I sold a Pepsi with Santa Claus on it for $85 earlier this year. So we'll see how she does, but I think she's just so sweet. Our next piece is this very pretty, very golden bracelet. Let me hold it up where you really see it in the light. This is by a company called Hobe. Hobe was originally a French company founded in the 1880s, and the son of the founder in 1920 decided to come to the United States. His son William quickly became very well known for good jewelry, and Hobe would sometimes even do fine jewelry or semi-precious stones in costume jewelry. Now this one is rhinestone, but they were very good with glitzy and good quality. Look at the way it's made here. Williams' work attracted the eye of Flo Ziegfeld, who did the Ziegfeld Follies on Broadway and then as movies in the 1930s. So a lot of the jewelry you see in the Ziegfeld Follies was made by Hobe. I think you're going to see the signature right there, yes. And Hobe didn't date things for a lot of their years, but this one has a very clear date, 1965. So we know exactly when this came out. I would say this was probably part of the holiday line again because it's very glitzy and very golden. Holiday jewelry was generally reds and greens and golds and silver. Get a little piece of fuzz off of there that I see in the light. I think it's a very pretty piece. It's very wearable. It doesn't have a lot of high relief, and so it's not going to catch on a lot of things, but it is definitely something, I mean, it would look better on a non-hairy wrist, I'm sure, but it definitely has a great look. I'm going to start at $39. I really believe that the value of this is somewhere in the $65 to $85 range, depending who sees it. So we will put it out there and see who finds it. I got this one actually at the antique show in Mount Dora in November on the rain day when I ended up going and shopping and filming because it was too rainy to sell. And there was one gal with jewelry in a tent that was sitting there packing up very slowly and just taking her time. And I came in and got this, and she was quite delighted to make a sale on a rainy day at an outdoor antique show. And I was quite delighted to get it and now bring it to you. This next piece of jewelry is something that's a little bit more cross-collectible because this is a sweetheart bracelet, and this features, it's a charm bracelet, and it features the charms related to the United States Marines. And I believe that these are companies 1 through 6. We've got Big Red 1. These are various regiments that the Marines have detachments who serve with. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Big Red 1 is actually right down the road here. I'm filming this in Western Kentucky. Marine detachments, they serve with alongside the Navy, they serve alongside the Army. So these regiments are relevant to them. This piece appears to be something that was probably made in the Vietnam era from the way it's made because it is chrome, it's not sterling. It's got the nice enameling. I like the color to it. And again, it's a nice big size. Both of these are about 6.5 or 7 inches long, which means they fit my wrist. And if they fit my wrist, they'll fit most of my customers' wrists. So glad to see this. It's an interesting piece. I haven't seen this exact one for sale. I will start this one at $19.99, which I think again is a pretty low price, and we'll let the market tell us what they think of it. I typically sell those. Honestly, they go more often than not these days, not to sweethearts, but to the mothers of people who are in the military. That's who a lot of the collectors are. But I also sell them to guys who collect military-related stuff because they've got the emblems of the regiments. And so there's interest there. So it could be worn by a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons. While we're on the subject of military, I have as well a U.S. Army knife, and I wanted to show this because it's something that you will see out in the wild. They made these like this for a long, long time, starting probably post-Korea, but before Vietnam, through the Vietnam era. And this one actually is dated on one of the blades 1987, so we know exactly when it came from. It's a 3-blade. It's by a company called Cameo. You can see it from this side. It's got the hanging hoop, which is really good. It could use a little bit of oiling. These blades, they do open, but it's a little bit tricky. So I'll see if I can open the one, here we go, that has the name. Cameo was a very, very good company making knives in New York. I understand that they are no longer in business, but this military contract helped keep them in business for a lot longer than a lot of the other knife companies. And it's in good shape. It doesn't have corrosion. It's got the can opener and 2 blades. I expect this will sell. You know, this style, I'm going to start again at $19.99 and let it go to wherever it should go. But I've seen them sell the 1980s version. It does depend on the date. The Vietnam era sell for more. They are probably in the 45 to 65 range. This one is more likely to sell somewhere around 30 to 35. There is one that they made that is a bright safety orange case, and that one's pretty collectible too. The reason I wanted to point this out is I know some of you are resellers, and not everybody who is watching this is necessarily a pocket knife collector or a Militaria fan, but if you're a reseller or you just like to thrift and hunt, you will see those. You'll see those on a bench or in a desk drawer at estates. It'll be on a workbench in the shop. It'll be sitting on a shelf next to where it was last used and just sort of left. And so I wanted to point those out because oftentimes they might sell for a few dollars in an estate sale, and they are a good, consistent seller. We are down to our last two items, and this one is just cute as can be. It's part of a big collection of a little bit of Holt Howard, a bunch of Devar, some PY, and other whimsy pieces. I have a whole shelf in a showcase in Florida of these things for sale now. I'm also bringing it to shows in Florida. I got a very nice collection. This one, it's not pixie wear, but it is a Knotter with a bee on the top. And isn't that great the way he shakes around? And he's well rooted, which is important because these often got broken or kids pulled on the spring and they broke or they got stretched. And this was to keep saccharin. And so it was being sold as a sugar substitute. And of course, sugar's bad for you, therefore you should use saccharin. So saccharin is better for me is the logo. This is by a company called Devar. They were a competitor of Holt Howard. They're not always so clearly marked, but this one not only has the 1959 date, but it also has, which are usually missing, the Devar paper label. It's interesting to me that it says Devar Originals. Treasure Craft started putting red labels, foil labels like this on the bottom of their elves and pixies, and they called it Treasure Craft Originals. And that is why, because they wanted to distinguish that we're not copying other people's stuff, we're making our own. Well, that is why a whole lot of other companies, including California Originals, Devar Originals, etc., used originals in their name because they realized that that was a selling point. One nice thing about this, and I'm going to hold it carefully while I show you, but it has little flanges so that the top will not just drop off and the bee land on its head. They must have known that people were going to need that if these things were going to survive at all. The paint stripes were done in a number of different colors, very pastel. I've seen yellow, I've seen pink, I've seen green. This is the first one I've seen in blue. I just thought it was so much fun. People who collect the pixie wear like these because it's a similar go along. People who like Knotters and bobbleheads like these. And some people just really love the irony of saccharin being better for you. So there's a lot of reasons that people collect these, and they sell for pretty good money. This typically sells for over $100. We're going to start this at $59 because we want to try to stimulate bidding and interest and let it go up from there. And hopefully it will find a new home. And that brings us to our last piece. If you folks saw me in Thrift Battle on Primetime Treasure Hunter, well, this was in the last round, the round that made me the winner of Thrift Battle, which was really, really a lot of fun. And that is because this came very inexpensively, but this is Tiffany. This is an ashtray, and it's got a nice encrusted design. And you would look at that and, oh, it's ornate, but it almost has sort of a deco feel, and you'd think, oh, that might be from the 1930s. This actually came out around 1910, and that's part of why it's significant is Tiffany designs were just ahead of their time. They were trendsetters. It's got a great mark on the back. It is solid sterling silver, and it's pretty heavy. You see the 925 out of 1,000, Tiffany and Company makers. This probably weighs 3.5 or 4 ounces. I see these sell plain on eBay all the time for around $150. I almost never see this patterning on the inside that makes it a lot more interesting to me. It is an individual ashtray. You would put the cigarette or cigar here. This one does have a monogram. Now, monograms, some people really like and some people really don't. The thing about monograms is if it's on sterling, you can buff it out because you've just got more sterling underneath. So you can actually have that taken away if you don't want the monogram, and it's not a very expensive process. On the other hand, if it is silver plate is done with a thin plate of silver over a base metal, and the base metal will show through, so you cannot take the monogram off of silver plate. So in sterling, monograms don't dissuade me, and besides which, I actually think that monogram, it's so interesting and stylistic that it almost just seems like it's part of the design. So if it was mine, if I was keeping it, I would probably just leave it alone. But it's going on eBay, and it will be up to the buyer to decide how they feel about that. But I think it's just a special piece for being so small. It's a lot of value in a small space, and that's one reason I really enjoy selling little bits of sterling when I can find them. This piece is going to start in the low $100 range. They should sell, considering the plain ones sell for about $150. I'm hopeful that this might go up as high as $195 or $2.25. I have seen these sell for $2.25 in retail antique stores, so I know that that's possible. So those are the 20 items dropping on eBay now, and they will be available to view over New Year's weekend. I figured this is a good time to be selling because a lot of people are going back home. More people are going to be on the computer. A lot of collectors did get Christmas money or gifts they didn't really want that they can trade in for Christmas money, and then they can buy what they really wanted. And so that is why in the antique and vintage business, oftentimes sales are better after Christmas than they are before, especially on certain types of items. And I have chosen on that basis. So we'll see how they do in the marketplace together. Thank you so much for watching this. It's really fun to find these items and curate them and try to pick a range of things that'll be interesting and different and tell you a little bit more about them. I'm so glad that people are interested in knowing more about this stuff. When I started this channel, I did it because I have a love for it and I just wanted to share what I knew. And honestly, I thought, ooh, if 100 people watch someday, that would be great. So it's just so gratifying to have so many people really interested in these things and coming along for the ride. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon. Check these out at the Antique Nomad on eBay, and you can follow the listings. If you are a level 2 or 3 member, of course, you're getting early access to this. Everyone else, you will get access soon. And if you want to get early access, check out the membership information in the description. Bye for now. If you enjoyed this video, check out this one. Also, click thumbs up to like this video and check the description for information about our Patreon, our memberships. We've got a lot of different levels with different perks and bonus videos and early content. Also, please do check out our website, theantiquenomad.com, for appraisal help. And we'll see you again for more adventures in the antique and vintage community soon. Bye for now.